Time travel has always been fascinating.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Imagine traveling to a different period in time to see what the world looks like. We tend to imagine some type of time machine that we can switch on and off and use to come and go. But here in Liverpool, people seem to slip back in time, randomly, unintentionally. Let's have a look at these two main stories of time slips on Bold Street. Our first story starts with a former police officer named Frank who was shopping with his wife Carol on a sunny afternoon in 1996. Walking around the town centre, Carol decided she wanted to get this book her friend was telling her about from the Waterstones bookshop on Bold Street. Frank wanted to have a look at some clothes for himself and suggested that she go on ahead and would meet her in Waterstones after. Frank bumped into his friend while looking at some clothes and spoke to him briefly before going to find Carol on Bold Street. This is where things start to get weird. Frank turned the corner onto Bold Street and looked up facing the Waterstones. Confused, Frank saw the sign above the shop door now read, Crips, instead. Still comprehending this, Frank continued towards the shop before a van swept past him displaying the name Cardins on the side and honking at him with an old-sounding horn. It was at this point that Frank stopped and began to take in all of his surroundings. He noticed that, like this van, all of the vehicles were now vintage 50s looking, and that the people around him were all dressed in traditional, old-fashioned suits and dresses. Frank was in disbelief and instinctively went to find his wife Carol, who he knew was in the Waterstones, or now Crips, and walked across the street to the shop. Once he got to the shop window, he realized that the name wasn't the only thing that had changed. Instead of books in the display cases, there were now handbags, shoes, dresses, and umbrellas for sale. He noticed a young woman standing outside the shop, dressed in modern 90s clothing, looking up at the shop sign confused. Being the only person he saw in normal clothes, he began to approach her before she stepped into the shop herself. As Frank followed her in, he was shocked to see that the store was now full of books. He turned back toward the front of the shop and saw that the display in the windows was now showcasing books, and the young woman he saw outside was now on her way out of the store, looking very confused. On her way out, Frank stopped the young woman and asked her, "Did you see that?" The young woman looked at him in shock and said, "Yes, I thought this was a new clothes shop," before hurrying out and away from Bold Street. In a 2023 interview for the BBC series Uncanny, Julie, the young woman who Frank saw, explains what happened on that day in 1996.
So I stood here and I looked into the window and the display was old-fashioned, like 1940s, vintage shoes and handbags. They looked really good quality and I thought, oh wow. I didn't know whether it was vintage or they just put on an old-fashioned 40s theme. And then I turned and seen the people. I'd probably seen about 12 people, but they were in like 1940s, 1950s clothes.
When you say that, what do you mean?
The men that stuck in my mind more is that they had Macs and hats on. And I distinctively remember a man with a big paper under his arm.
So do you go into the shop?
Yeah, I went into the shop. I opened the door and as I went in, initially, everything was at old-fashioned displays. It was dark inside. And then, as I turned around, the shop became lighter again. Next to me, there was just book displays. I'd seen a sign for Dylan's. As I'm coming to come out of the door, a man in 90s clothes, now this is the first person I'd seen in normal 90s clothes, grabbed my arm. He said, "Did you see that?" I was like, "Yeah."
And that man is Frank.
Yeah.
Both of you experienced this moment at the same time.
Yeah.
Both Frank and Julie remain adamant that what they experienced was real and still confuses them to this day. However, this is not an isolated incident. In 2006, a 19-year-old man named Sean had a very similar experience to Frank and Julie. Sean was a young and mischievous man who had been in and around Bold Street, looking to steal something from one of the shops, when a security guard noticed what he was up to and began to chase him. Sean took off running out of the shop and turned down an alleyway to try and lose him, only to run into a dead end. Sean, knowing the security guard was right behind him, turned and waited for the security guard to come down the alleyway and catch him any second now. After a couple of minutes, the security guard had not turned the corner, and Sean felt something was odd. He began to walk back down the alleyway and out onto the street where he came from to check where he had gone and why he felt so strange. To his shock, everything had changed. People were now dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and the cars were all outdated and vintage. Even the roadworks Sean spotted on his way down the street, literally minutes ago, were now gone. Feeling worried, Sean took out his phone and saw it had no signal. He began to walk down Bold Street, feeling concerned. Sean then had a look at a nearby newspaper kiosk and saw the date on the broadsheet was the 18th of May, 1967. Now, in a blind panic, Sean realized he had somehow traveled back 39 years and began to run down the street as fast as he could. As he did, he began to see more and more familiarity around him. People were now suddenly wearing modern clothing again, and he could see that cars and shops had gone back to normal too. Sean jumped on the next bus he saw and got out of there as fast as he could. When Sean got home, he told everyone about his experience, and his story was even featured in the local newspaper. In an interview after the story was published, the security guard detailed how he remembered Sean and that he chased him out of the shop and down the street into an alleyway before realizing Sean had vanished. Knowing he wasn't far behind Sean, he was stunned that he'd gotten away and didn't think much of it until hearing Sean's story a few days later. Sean's description of 1967 Bold Street was strangely accurate. He detailed stores, people, and vehicles that would have been there at that time in 1967, making this very similar to what Frank and Julie experienced. There have been other claims of time slips on Bold Street, such as a student who found himself slipping to the 1950s while walking to get some food. However, these claims are very similar in that most people slip back and see Bold Street in the 1950s or 60s, and in a panic, try to come back to the present as quickly as possible, unsure of how they even got there. The idea of time slips has been widely debated and discussed, as so many of these incidents have been reported across the world, not just on Bold Street, and not just into the past. So, let's have a look at what could be going on here. The first theory that could explain what is happening here is linked to the theory of the multiverse. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard about the multiverse theory, the idea that there are infinite universes interconnected and coinciding with each other across their respective timelines. This could explain why Frank, Sean, and Julie were in their current timeline before being seemingly transported into the 1960s. According to this theory, both of these timelines are playing out at the same time and same place, but in different universes that somehow Frank, Sean, and Julie have slipped into. Whilst scientists are still yet to find any evidence of the existence of a multiverse, many people seem to think this is a likely explanation for what is happening during a time slip. What do you think? The second is that this is us somehow experiencing the past in the present through something called the stone tape theory. The idea is that, like recording audio or video on tape, our energy is recorded to the stone or material that is around us and can be triggered to replay by certain environmental factors. One such factor that could trigger this is the underground railways that were built under Bold Street roughly around the 50s, which could explain why Frank, Sean, and Julie all experienced this specific time period. People have theorized that the energy passing through the underground railways may have somehow caused this phenomenon. Many people online seem to believe that this is a likely explanation for what has caused these time slips on Bold Street. None of this has been proven, however, and these ideas are widely discussed. What do you think about this? Another theory that has been discussed is the idea of both individual and mass hallucinations, which have occurred throughout history in other situations. Like the dancing plague of 1518, where a whole town of people randomly began dancing and couldn't stop, resulting in over 400 people dying from exhaustion. While I understand this is very different, it showcases how mass hallucinations or hysteria can result in the most bizarre situations. Frank, Sean, and Julie could be experiencing hallucinations and seeing things that are not actually there, potentially being a result of their subconscious or other environmental factors. However, this doesn't seem to explain how they were able to see historically accurate information specific to Bold Street. Like, how would Frank have been aware of specific information, like the Cripps store or the Cardin's delivery van? The last theory is simply that these stories could be fake. While this is the most pessimistic approach to what is going on here, many would say this is the most likely. People can gain a lot of attention from stories like these, and due to the mysterious nature of the claim, people will just eat the story up. Now, this isn't unheard of. In 1835, the New York Sun published a story claiming there had been a discovery of life on the moon, which later they admitted to be false. This hasn't happened in the case of the Bold Street time slips, however, and quite the opposite. All witnesses to these events corroborated each other and gave historical evidence that points to their claims being truthful. Are Frank and all of the others lying about slipping back in time? We can't possibly cover every single theory in this video, and I do encourage you to research this and have a look for yourself. I'd love to hear your opinion on what is going on here. Which of the theories do you think are most likely, or do you have your own? I think the idea that this is some type of glitch or slip into another alternate version of our reality or another universe is a fun idea and potentially real based on these stories. I think the people who experience this do believe they slipped back in time and did experience what they said. Whether they actually slipped back in time into another universe or witnessed a live replay of the 50s and 60s, we will never know. But what do you think is going on here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please, like the video if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button, and turn on the bell to be alerted the next time we upload. We will be releasing a brand new video every week. I hope you guys have a great day. See you on the next one.